So there are elements right now in your profession that are easily transferable, whether they're hard skills or soft skills, right? The fact that you are client facing or patient facing for that matter, the way that you're able to prioritize and understand which of these interventions are most mission critical and which of these can I bring into later on. That critical thinking is so important across the board, regardless of whether or not you're looking for something in tech or operations.
Welcome to Nursing Beyond the Bedside. I'm Audrey, your host, and a nurse who pivoted my path several years ago. After 8 years as a critical care nurse, I was ready for change. I craved higher pay and more flexibility, but was struggling to find a clear path forward. Fast forward through positions in recruiting, customer success, and marketing, and many lessons learned along the way. Today, I run Pivot Path, a company dedicated to empowering nurses to redefine their careers. This podcast is designed to help you navigate the journey from clinical bedside nursing to a fulfilling career that aligns with your passions and goals. Here, you'll discover inspiring stories from nurses who've gone beyond the bedside, successfully transitioning to non-clinical roles, or redefining their nursing career. Join us as we hear their stories and share actionable strategies to help you make your own leap. Whether you're a new listener curious about what lies beyond the bedside, or a returning audience member in need of some fresh motivation, this podcast is your go-to resource for exploring new opportunities that can transform your career. Let's get started. We're excited to have Michael on the show with us today. After spending 5.5 years as a critical care nurse, Michael made a bold move into life sciences and eventually became a project manager. He's worked on SaaS solutions for health systems with pharmaceutical organizations and employer groups. Now, he's a founder of Lumago Professional Services, where he focuses on helping mid-career nurses make the leap into tech roles. Michael's all about empowering nurses to use their skills to revolutionize healthcare. Welcome, Michael. So glad to have you with me here today.
Hey, Audrey, it's great to be here.
Awesome. Well, I am really excited to share your story. On this podcast, we hear all types of different paths that nurses have taken, and you've kind of done a couple of different things. So I'd love to kind of dive into each one a little bit so that we can hopefully share some tactical steps and advice with the audience today.
Yeah, for sure.
So I know that you started your career as a critical care nurse. What was the catalyst for you considering other career options from being a bedside nurse?
So when I first started, I worked in the emergency department and I worked there for a couple of years. I think for me, what was really outstanding was being able to focus on the overall operations of things. Like as nurses, we assess things and evaluate things and develop interventions or plan things. So, I think one of the things that really stood out to me is kind of the environment of being in the emergency department, being able to triage specific needs or prioritize specific needs. So that led me to be a little bit more operationally savvy in terms of how I care for my patients, or also like how I'm looking at things from the bigger picture perspective. Kind of after I worked in the emergency department, I moved over to critical care. And I think that was kind of just the first taste of understanding what opportunities could exist outside of being a bedside nurse. I think I was super blessed and honored to have the opportunity to start our comprehensive unit safety program at one of the hospitals that I had worked at. And for me, I started having a quality mindset, definitely working with our providers as well as our nurse leaders in terms of measuring our sepsis rates and then actioning on how to further decrease our rates of CLABSIs, any HAPUs, and any other things that would have adverse or negative outcomes from a patient care perspective. And so after that, it was really just understanding like, hey, this was my approach to quality, and I was really interested in it, and that kind of transferred over into my other jobs in critical care. Was really being I'm really not the type of person that can sit still or just do one job at a time. Like I really like getting involved in committees, like getting my feet wet, love getting exposed to stuff. So whether that's talking to my manager or my charge nurse or even within, the PAs or the MDs and DOs within my care unit, it's being able to understand, like, I want to be part of the bigger picture and help to action on that to the benefits of our patients.
Yeah, I hear from a lot of nurses that I talk to on this pod about, wanting to kind of zoom out and take a look at problems to actually like solve them from the root cause, like why they're happening in the first place. And I think it's important to recognize that nurses, we do a lot of tasks in our day, but it takes a lot of organization and zooming out and like looking at your patient load as a whole and organizing your day, prioritizing your tasks, and like figuring out how everything is going to get done and get done at the right time. So we're really actually better at process management than a lot of us might think if we've never really assessed using those skills in that type of way.
Yeah, 100%. Audrey, actually, like on Monday, I was just talking with one of our executive team leaders, and, she was asking, like, how, like, what's Michael Urgel's, like, method of madness? Like, how is he able to organize things and create kind of some sense and some flow to some of the things that are, like, coming through our pipeline, et cetera? And for me, like, I told her, as a clinician, we're so embedded on like the nursing process. So like assessment, diagnosing, planning, implementation or intervention and evaluation. To your point, like that is literally embedded in our career. And when it comes to interventions or clinical interventions that we're providing to our patients, we have to have the rationale for why we're doing certain things. Like why does the patient's head of the bed have to be elevated to 30 degrees? Or why are we giving this PRN pain medication? There's guardrails and there's reasons for why we're doing things. So I think naturally nurses are trained and they have the mindset to really think like, this is the root cause. This is the reason why we're creating actionable plans for certain things that we want to implement.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so how did you start thinking about a job away from the bedside? Like, were you looking for jobs away from the bedside, or how did you make that pivot?
So I think, and maybe a lot of the listeners can probably resonate with this too, is that when we're going into specific care areas or when we're maturing into our nursing career, there's the option to be an advanced practice provider, whether that's a nurse practitioner, a clin spec, or a nurse anesthetist. And I think for me, I was on the journey of, all right, I'm in critical care. I have other coworkers that are thinking about going to CRNA school. I think it's a really great idea. I even shadowed CRNAs and kind of just understood their journey. So I think my pivot into other areas within the ICU setting or the ICU umbrella was really kind of just focused on being a CRNA, going to CRNA school, and practicing as a nurse anesthetist. And I think where I found the pivot was, I think for me, like I've always had like a penchant for technology or like maybe understanding the operations of certain things, kind of back to my ER days of like really understanding the environment or the ergonomics of our ecosystem within the emergency department. So within that, it was like, do I go to CRNA school? Do I go to more the business side of things? And I think kind of at that time, there were definitely nurse leaders and, nurse leaders who have had like a more business foundation after they had graduated from their nursing degree and got more formal schooling. So there's definitely been kind of mentors and people in my life that I've had a chance to talk to and kind of just really understand like this is how they became the chief nursing officer or the nursing director. But I think really where I was at that time was, how do I bridge the gap? Like there wasn't a position in mind at the time. Like I didn't, like it was either CRNA school or the something else. And the something else wasn't like fully vetted out and defined yet. So I was like, I really like tech. I like maybe the business side of things, or at least what I understand operations to be. And so for me, like what happened was there was support happening with one of our medical devices, and one of the reps was there. And it honestly it was just happenstance because I was working night shift and this was like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. I had just finished drawing labs on from my patient's A line, and she came onto the unit and just provided an in-service. And I was like, I think I was probably at the crossroads of I want to look for something more, but I just didn't know what it was. So I really just did my discovery with her and just asked her a few questions like, first of all, how did you get your job? I didn't know jobs like this could exist, and you are an RN. How did you do it? So, after she told me about her experience and that she was able to travel all over the country providing trainings on these medical devices, that to me was already kind of like a selling point of like, this sounds like a really great opportunity. I get to travel, I get to go to different health systems, I get to meet different clinicians, not just nurses, but techs and providers who were using this device. And so that was kind of just like a blessing in disguise at the time. It was like literally 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. And I was like, man, you're a champ for staying up that late and providing an in-service to us. But yeah, I wanted to learn more.
Yeah, that's interesting. I actually didn't know that they would do in-services, in the middle of the night.
All hours of the day.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And so, how long was it between when you had that conversation and when you were actively pursuing that position?
I want to say it was probably between 4 to 6 months. And there may have been a little part of me that was a little impatient. I had sent in my application. I got her referral. I remember I was in New York the next weekend hanging out with a couple buddies of mine, and she had called on a Saturday and was like, Michael, I just wanted to let you know I put your referral in, like HR has your application. She did forewarn me that it was going to take some time. It was a large corporate organization, so it was like more than 10,000 employees. So I tried to be as patient as I could, but I think after month 3, I was starting to feel a little bit of the, where are we? Like, I think I already had the HR interview at the time, but it was like, am I not moving forward? Like, should I look for other opportunities? I didn't even know where to look. Like, I didn't have a LinkedIn profile. I didn't know how to build my personal brand at the time. So it was like, do I just go to another health system or work in a different care area? And so finally, actually, one of my really, really good friends, she also works at that company still, but in a different position. She did the same role as what I had been going into when I was working for the company. And so I just asked her straightforward. I was like, I sent in my application. It's been a couple months. Where do I stand? I didn't know how the whole hiring process worked in that corporate side of healthcare. So I asked her, I was like, it's been a minute. Should I just look for other opportunities outside? And she had said, thank you for being patient. It's going to take some time, but I will follow up on it. And she did follow up on it. And probably a month or so afterwards, I had an interview, and then the job offer came shortly after.
It's funny how different that process is especially with a large corporation versus getting a bedside nursing job. Because usually with nursing jobs, you apply, you hear back within a week, you get an interview, and then you get an offer. It's very straightforward. But yeah, that process can definitely take a while, especially seems like the bigger the company, the longer it takes.
Yeah, I mean, I even remember, some of my previous nursing jobs, and maybe the climate is different now because of the shortages that we're seeing, but there was a dedicated nurse recruitment team, and every single health system has kind of the same modus operandi for this, where you have a dedicated talent acquisition team just for nurses. They're focused on onboarding. And so that is a completely different experience, very polarized compared to what we experience in corporate America, where it might take months or might take weeks unless you know somebody. And even then it might still feel like a long pull, even though it's short in the terms of the more corporate world.
Exactly. Yeah, two totally different worlds for sure. So, what was the actual title of that position where you were, traveling and training clinicians on devices?
It was called a clinical education specialist. I think now it's changed to clinical application specialist, just to kind of make it more encompassing that it was just more than a person training. They were actually providing clinical and a little bit of level 1 technical support to clinicians using the device.
Yeah. And did you have to be a clinician to get that job?
Yeah, for this position, the requirements were you had to be a nurse, you had to work in critical care, and I think at the time, I don't know if it's still the same, but it was like at least 5 years, maybe more. So I was kind of hitting that sweet spot of like, all right, it's been 5-ish years. Let's see if this opportunity is able to knock on my door.
Yeah. The reason I ask that is because I think that a lot of people, when they're looking for a different type of nursing job, they're still searching for a nursing job. And a lot of time, nursing is nowhere to be found in these job titles. So I think it's important to talk about, kind of what all is out there and what settings you can go and work in. So I definitely think that's a cool one, especially getting to travel around. That's fun, at least for a chapter of a career.
Yeah. I think honestly, when people are doing their job searching, I think anything that might have the keyword clinical in it is going to be key in your job search. It might not necessarily be just nursing, but there's going to be elements of being a practicing clinician in the industry that's going to be transferable for that particular role.
Absolutely. So after you worked that job for a few years, talk to me about your next transition. What did that look like?
So this was probably, I think I was at that company for like 4.5 years, and the traveling it was fun, but I think the excitement was waning. For me, I was probably 27 or something at the time. And I really wanted, like, I was still hungry for growth, and I wanted to, and by growth, like, it could either be like vertical growth, whether you're going to be a people leader, like managing others on the team, or just growth in general in a different channel, whether that's, I really had a profound passion for operations. Should I go, or can I go into a different discipline that is more operationally savvy, like project management or program management? So at that time, I was yearning for growth opportunities. And the way that it was structured was, it was very vertical at the time. You could either go into management and be a people leader of the clinical education staff, or you can make a pivot and do something completely different, like project management. Well, at the time, I was applying for other positions. One of them was a leader in sales training. So it was like training, but you were training all of the sales and account management individuals within the organization. So there was a level of complexity with it because your delivery was going to be different than if you had trained clinicians. Now, I had applied for that role, and one of my friends ended up getting that role. She was definitely way more deserving of it, and she's well versed when it comes to client facing opportunities and encounters. And so at that time, I was looking for opportunities outside of the company when it came to project management. I had known for myself that that was the next position or chapter in my life that I wanted to get into. And so I looked for other opportunities. It was a combination of, high growth stage startups or larger corporate organizations. I didn't really know anything about the startup space at the time. And so I dug right in. I found jobs that said project management in it. I finally had a LinkedIn profile at the time. So that to me, honestly, is like a time saver when it comes to like branding yourself from a professional standpoint, and also looking for jobs in the healthcare industry. And so I found a job in a high growth stage startup, and that was probably my first project, like true project management job outside of this clinical education or clinical application role.
Yeah. And what type of training did you need to transition into a project management role?
For this particular role, what they really valued was somebody who was a clinician. So the role was called a clinical operations manager, and all of the COMs or clinical ops managers, they were all RNs. Most of the ones that I was working with had either worked in life sciences through medical devices. So even though they didn't have the pure title of project manager in their previous jobs, there was a level of project management involved. So like with clinical education, or what I was doing in my previous company in the medical device space was, you had to plan the training, you had to schedule, you had to talk with the client to understand these are the different hours that are available. So there's a level of implementation and execution, but it wasn't like the full end-to-end project management. That, however, can still be valued as project management expertise or experience.
Yeah, for sure. And getting that type of experience is such a good bridge between, the experience that you did have in the clinical setting to that operations and process oriented, you know, next step being project management. For the audience that may not be aware, can you kind of describe what life sciences, like what that industry is and what that means?
Yeah, the big known buckets in life sciences is biotech and pharma. So think of your medical devices, any FDA approved equipment. So things that would monitor or measure certain things like your vital signs, any software based applications that are used for that too is considered life sciences. And then there's the biopharma aspect of it. So think your pharmaceuticals, think of your therapies like gene therapy, that would be considered part of the life sciences space. So it's a huge umbrella term, but really the big buckets I would say are probably medical devices and pharma.
Yeah. And I think that that's at least for me, when I was searching for jobs at first, I was like, life sciences, what is that? And, like a lot of them, it depends on the role, but I see a lot of those jobs asking for experience in clinical research, pharmaceuticals, and medical devices, which is kind of like the fall into the buckets that you just mentioned. So it's neat that you found your way into that environment. And so working on clinical workflows and collaborating with product teams, what was new, exciting, challenging to you about working on that type of thing?
For me, it was very much further adjusting your lens or your purview of strategy and critical thinking, right? Like you're introducing more players in the field. Like it's not just the nurse to nurse workflow of like, this is our S-bar handoff. This is what we do. Like as you incorporate more players into the field, like you introduce more complexities. So, working with health systems and building those clinical workflows, there's things you have to consider too, is like, man, for this, probably I personally thought it was just like, all right, let's stand this up. We can stand this up very quickly. But no, there's so many considerations that you have to take into place. Even just implementing a remote patient monitoring program, for example, or just a new service line, right? Like you have to think of the logistics of it. If you're talking about pure hardware, how is that hardware going to be procured and delivered to the patient? What are those entry points? Is it going to be a clinic? Is it going to be a inpatient visit, like prior to their discharge? And then even so too, like, what does case management look like? So yes, you're procuring the device, but do they have other needs? Like, is this patient a complex heart failure patient where they need durable medical equipment shipped to their home? So you have to think like, how are they going to get their oxygen tank? How are they going to get a wheelchair or things like transportation? How are they going to get to and from doctor's appointments? Do we need to use a third party, or is the family going to take the ownership for all of this? So even for that one program where you could, I think for me, when I was first starting, it was like, you just put it on the patient and you can monitor them through the cloud-based software that we developed. No, it's more complex than that. And I think that's the interesting part. Like, at least where I've seen my career trending is like, I'm constantly like changing the lens on my camera, and it's increasing in breadth and depth, but also width, because, you're trying to understand the vertical workflows for all of these key players. You have to make sure all of them are aligned so everything's coordinated in one swift choreographed fashion.
And that's hard, particularly in healthcare. our
Well,
our our healthcare system is so complex, and there
yeah.
are so many. I mean, even just think about, rounds in the ICU. There's, I don't know, 7 different specialties that can show up to any one patient. And so, yeah, thinking about coordinating between different care teams, environments, whoever's supplying the equipment, that is extremely complex and a lot to manage and wrap your head around, but a fun puzzle to solve.
It is. And that's like such an excellent analogy that you brought up, Audrey, because that's really like the nurse is like functioning as the central hub for that. The case manager does too as part of their professional role, but when the nurse is in rounds, from what I've seen in different health systems, is the nurse is the one presenting the patient. And so you go through each collaborative partner, whether that's nutrition or whether that's PT, OT, and speech or case management, and you kind of meet outside of the patient's room to talk about this is the current state, these are the different systems physiologically, and then these are their needs, both from an ADL and IADL standpoint. That's literally like standing up a program. So if you make an analogous comparison to program management or project management, even think of that as your patient needing all of these deliverables or key things that they need in order to be successful, or, in another term, have a positive patient outcome, either clinically or in terms of their experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And how long were you in that role before, once again, it was time to shift a little bit and change up what you were doing?
Some people probably would have thought I was there for a long time, but it actually ended up being about a year and a month. I think for me, where I was having some personal challenges is like, I still wanted to grow. And this is part of me just not knowing how to sit still, is like, man, there's so much more out there. Like, I feel like I've just gotten the tip of the iceberg in the healthcare industry. And mind you, this was also my first startup. I think when I joined, it was either a series B or C. So there was still rounds of funding before they got acquired. And so I think for me, there was still the wearing the multiple hats, like, this role doesn't exist yet. So we need to like create some sort of backfill with our existing resource pool, and building pretty much net new everything, whether that was like project templates, project documentation, clinical pathways, you name it. Like all of that was probably being authored fresh out of the box, fresh out of the brains of the people within our organization. So I was still excited, and I wanted to find an organization that was also high growth. I still love to continue to roll my sleeves up. So I wanted to align with another organization that kind of had the same magnitude when it came to opportunities for wearing multiple hats and just really rolling your sleeves up and not having it not be such a rigid hierarchical structure when it came to leadership.
I feel like that's the ER nurse in you who wants to kind of wear many hats and do all the things.
Yeah, we're like transport and like the lab tech and yeah, at the same time.
Yeah, I actually enjoy that about the startup environment as well. Yeah, the roles are not so rigid, and you get to go try on different things. And, if there's something that you don't know how to do, but it needs to get done, there's likely not someone who specifically does that at the company yet. So it's on you to figure out. So it's a great environment, honestly, to like learn in, because just like the ER, you are learning something new almost every day, just as a forcing function of doing your job.
Yeah, exactly. Like, or you have EMS coming in with a medic in 5 to 7 minutes, and like you don't know what's coming in. It's like a 55-ish-year-old status post fall, like status epilepticus after fall, but like it could be a whole slew of other things going on. I think I will say that the startup culture is maybe not for everybody. So it's kind of just understanding, like if you are on the pursuit for looking at opportunities, and you are interested in what I've said about startup, there's a lot of unpredictability. And so it's just being comfortable with the uncomfortable. And if you are definitely the type of person who does like a more predictive model when it comes to your work and your operations, startup could definitely be there. But I will say the kind of more Series A, Series B, when they're just starting, may provide a little bit more of a challenge, but it could honestly be a healthy challenge for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something important to consider, but a hard thing to consider for nurses who are looking at other environments to go and work in. It's important to consider, but I say hard to consider because you just don't know what you don't know. And so trying
Right.
to understand what the work environment might be like at a early stage startup versus a company that's been around for 10 years versus a giant corporation can be hard to imagine. But I think that what you just laid out here about those early stage startups, it's super unpredictable. You wear many hats and you just kind of got to be in like hustle mode and be wanting and eager to just figure things out as you go.
Yeah, you brought up a really great point. It's definitely the ER nurse in me. I'm pretty sure like I I love just, jumping right in, even when like a lot of the stuff is still unknown.
Yeah, absolutely. So after that experience, you pivoted into the employer benefits space. What was that like and what all did that entail?
I was very uncomfortable because I didn't have the knowledge base for at all, actually. Like, I didn't know anything about the benefit space. So this is a first for me. And I had to do a lot of my own personal homework and kind of my own personal download when I started with this organization. But I think one of the things that felt really good for me is that my previous boss had actually worked for the CEO, and she had said so many great things about his leadership style and just the culture of work and how everybody is so high functioning, high performing, that I wanted to align with that organization, given that I was not a subject matter expert. And I still probably won't say that I'm a subject matter expert in that field, but I'm learning.
Yeah. And so what did that next role, first of all, what was the role title and what did the roles like responsibilities actually look like?
So the role was a client implementation project manager, and it was very straightforward, like how you hear the title. We would implement new clients that would be leveraging our SaaS-based solution of a health and care platform.
Yeah, and so training. I know that you said that you did a lot of self-education and your own homework to kind of bring yourself up to speed. At this point, had you sought out additional education or certifications to take on that next position?
Yeah, I did. So when I was working as a project manager from this previous job, as opposed to what I'm doing right now, I actually looked for my PMP, or my project management professional. So that is like the globally recognized certification for project managers. The certifying body is the Project Management Institute. So if you think like your nursing certifications, think of that as like your CCRN for critical care or your CMSRN for med surg, right? And then within PMI, there's different like specialty certifications. I won't go through this call right now, but I think foundationally that is what I yearn for. And at the time, we were actually fortunate enough to get funding for continuing education at this company to pursue the PMP. So a couple of colleagues and myself, we studied for the PMP. We got our PMP certifications. I think I've had mine for over a year. Some of my other colleagues have also had theirs for about a year or nearing up to a year.
Yeah, I think that a lot of nurses, when we think about doing something new, we come from this very regulated world where everyone has a specific degree, license, certification to do the job that they do. And while some jobs do require that, it's also important to realize that not every job requires like a specific certification or education to do the job. A lot of times you're just getting on the job training and you're putting in the extra time and effort to catch yourself up on the things that you feel like you're lacking on. But it's cool to find that employers actually have budget and programs built in to educate the people who they want in those positions. I've talked to other guests as well who have found an employer who send them through whatever coursework is required for the job. I just think that for the audience listening, don't let an extra certification be a blocker to pursuing a certain path, because I think that you'll find, honestly, more times in the business world than not, an employer will make sure that can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. And if that benefit doesn't exist right now, you can always talk to your HR representative, especially when it comes to continuing education. Companies value retention. So if there's any way to empower you or to let you grow while you stay in the company, and if that is an opportunity, aka like pursuing continuing education, then it's definitely worth the conversation if that benefit doesn't exist for your company.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me a little bit about moving into this type of role from what you had been doing. Do you feel, I'm asking this question because a lot of nurses feel like they will lose a sense of fulfillment and impact if they leave direct patient care. How do you find fulfillment and impact in your role?
For me, when you're standing up a program and you understand the amount of covered lives an employer group has, and you're providing them access to equitable and quality care, that is so meaningful. I think the biggest difference is as a clinician or a bedside nurse, you are seeing the direct outcomes of your patient. If you are giving them a medication, or if you're having them sit up on the recliner and using their incentive spirometer, you're going to see their lung capacity gradually improve. Like, you're seeing that directly rather than I'm implementing a program and I'm assuming that this is going to be utilized by the 38,000 or 50,000 or whatever hundred of thousands people in that employer organization. The benefit is different, or kind of the way that you see the fulfillment is different, but when you're standing up something that's going to provide equal access, like, that is so meaningful. Like, in healthcare right now, we have these factors like social determinants of health that bar people from getting equitable access to high quality care. There's literal healthcare deserts that exist in our country. And in our country, we put so much investments on tech and investments in pharmaceuticals and all of these very progressive therapies, but foundationally, we still have areas and pockets within our country that don't get care. So even chronic condition management, like your heart failure patients or your renal failure patients, they might not get the medications that they need. Number one, because a facility doesn't exist to provide that access. Number two, they might not be able to afford the types of therapies because they might not have the healthcare coverage, or might not be able to provide or be able to fund themselves with the pharmaceuticals that are needed. And number three, purely, I think it's just consumer education. It's like, you have renal failure, you know, access to even food, and having that food education or nourishment education is really important. But I think also too, like, empowering the consumer to understand that these are the types of therapies that exist right now in our industry. These are the things that you can get into to have a better positive outcome. There's so many varying factors or circumstances that still lack a lot of our populations in America.
Yeah, I think that you're spot on with calling out. You are impacting a much larger population in your day-to-day work. And while it might not be that direct hands-on patient care, the impact is a greater scale. You're impacting possibly hundreds of thousands of patients versus one patient at a time. So yeah, I just think that's always an interesting thing to call out, because it seems that nurses, as a people, we are very passionate about making an impact and doing good. So I think it's really neat to learn about the different types of ways that people are finding fulfillment in new areas.
Yeah, and even what we're doing right now with value-based contracting, just generating the cost savings for that member. for a procedure that otherwise could have been very costly for them. Let's say they're a blue collar person that makes maybe less than 50K or maybe less than 30K a year, and they have a family of 4 to 6 children or maybe more, and they live in a very small apartment or a very small house. Just understanding the costs associated with a procedure or a type of therapy, like those are the things that we're trying to solve at this organization. And I'm extremely grateful to be working with such like-minded people who are really looking at the total cost of care and how that impacts that particular person's personal journey.
Yeah, that's so important. I mean, healthcare is crazy expensive in this country, and it is hard to imagine the individual impact of that in certain scenarios. So I think it's awesome that you guys are working on that. And also just, to flag for people who are looking at different companies and jobs that they could take. I do think that finding a company with a mission and values that you align with is important, particularly for us as nurses, because we do care about what we're working on.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, like even in previous interviews that I've had before is like, I really value a company that is driving for something that's really good for the greater good or for the mass of the population. But I think something too is like, what is that company's stance on diversity, equity, and inclusion? And like, those are the two things that I really hold near and dear to my heart is yes, there's that mission and vision piece that you want to align to. So you want to work in a company that feels meaningful to you. Right? Like, yes, there might be days where it can be really chaotic and really busy. Like you might be working, I don't know, maybe up to 10, 12 hours a day for a couple of weeks. There's some seasonality to that. But if you're working towards something and you're totally aligned with that mission, that's great. And I also want to, like personally, I also want to work with an organization that really highlights that we have such a huge population of just different nationalities and different ethnicities or backgrounds, different genders. If you find a company that really has a stance or a strong positioning on how it celebrates the differences that we have as individuals, but the unity that we can come together and really create this mission together, that for me is like my secret sauce to like finding a really great organization.
Yeah, I think that people can kind of fall into the circuit of just applying to job after job, like semi-blindly. Like the job description looks fine, great, but I think that research into the company to make sure that company is a good match for you as an individual and what you value and all of that. It's all the big picture, it's never just one thing. But yeah, it's awesome that you found a great spot for yourself. So I want to hear about your own company. I want to hear about founding Lumago Professional Services. What was your motivation and what do you do?
This was like a birthday gift to myself. I remember I was in the hotel room with my family and I was like, should I just do it? Should I like sign up for this LLC? And like I've been like pondering on it for about a year, more than a year for sure. It's probably been like 2-3 years. I remember probably back in January, I had dinner with 2 of my colleagues who I used to work with in the life sciences space. And both of them were like, you just need to, why haven't you done this already? Like you keep talking about it, just do it and like, just be done with it because you've been having this hang over your head. So I finally decided to do it. And really where we position Lumago Professional Services is that it's a management consulting firm. And what I mean by that is we work with different companies, primarily in the health and wellness space, to kind of just optimize their administrative functions. So whether that's standing up a project management office, and makes sense because like I've been a project manager for a couple of years. I kind of have an idea of what best practices are. So being able to stand up a project management office or kind of an office that assigns project managers to particular strategic initiatives of the organization, and then having that document repository of best practice material like your project plans, your client-facing materials, all of your risk mitigation planning, and then your decision-making framework. All of that stuff is housed in the project management office. So I've done that with a couple organizations. I've also provided education to some individuals and other organizations too on project management best practices. So there's that arm of Lumago Professional Services, and then there's the career coaching service as well. I've been a mentor for as long as I can remember. This probably has something to do as well with, either working for that life sciences company or even back to my grandmothers who were both teachers. It's like, I love teaching people. I love seeing people grow. So if there's an opportunity for me to create a platform that's going to be a safe space for individuals to feel like themselves and just be authentically transparent with, this is where I want to grow, or I'm at a roadblock, help me get out of here. I want to be that person that helps to unblock and provide you a path so that you can grow and succeed within the industry. And so right now for Lumago, even though, yes, I am working on my go-to-market for this year and really doing more of a hard launch for 1/1/25, it's really what I want as like kind of my phase one or my initial vision is to work with mid-career nurses who are looking for opportunities to grow, whether that is being an advanced practice provider, whether that's going through their clinical ladder and working towards a Clin 3 or Clin 4, or making a pivot like what I did and making their way into life sciences or consulting or anything for that matter. I want to be that person that helps provide you with a clear path and some guidance and navigation, because I've had to do it, myself. And, I wish I had a coach at the time, honestly, to help me navigate through some of these waters. But for me, if I had to do it all over again, yes, I would have loved a coach. But in terms of where my paths have crossed, I probably wouldn't change where I went and where I grew.
Yeah. It's interesting to me and exciting that you kind of have an arm of the business for, you've kind of got a B2B side and a B2C side, so the the consulting with businesses side, thinking of that as your B2B, and then, the B2C is direct to nurses and bringing them up to speed for a career pivot. That's exciting. And a lot to, it's cool that you've built a business around the two areas, though they are different, the two areas that you have experience in. You're kind of leveraging your project management experience when you're consulting with the companies, and then you're leveraging your own experience from your early career to where you are now to help guide other nurses through that. So I think that all of that's very exciting. How did you land on specifically helping nurses get into tech?
Probably my own personal journey, selfishly, because it's like there are nurses out there who have a kind of a tech passion and probably an operations passion too. And I've talked to other nurses who have become product managers. I've talked to nurses who have pursued engineering degrees. And so for me, it was a no-brainer to kind of think through, like, what does that pathway look like and what kind of exposure does this individual need to get to that space?
Right. I also think that generally speaking, in the health tech industry specifically, pulling nurses into those roles is so crucial. And I actually think that companies are waking up to this more and more as well. They're realizing, like, oh, we're solving problems within healthcare. Who knows those problems better than anyone else? It's going to be a nurse. So I think that setting nurses up for success to take on those roles and make an impact in that way is really important.
This is why I'm so grateful, like, that companies like Pivot Path also exist and like companies like Lumago exist, because we do need to empower nurses, and that there are aspects of the healthcare industry in which a great deal of nursing knowledge, or at least understanding of, when we talk about product, we talk about user experience and design, right? Like, to your point earlier, it's like, who's going to understand that story point or that persona? The nurse is going to get that.
Right. Absolutely. It's so, yeah, we need to recognize our own value in being able to help solve these types of problems. And I think that you and I both very heavily agree on the fact that nurses have developed a very strong set of primarily soft skills that translate into other roles, and being able to leverage those and talk about those to communicate your value when you're pursuing these types of opportunities is really important. Do you have any just a few key takeaways for the audience if they're a nurse and they're listening to this conversation and thinking, health tech, solving problems in healthcare, getting into the tech space, that sounds interesting to me. What are some things that they could start doing or thinking about now to kind of set themselves up for that path?
Never be afraid to learn. Never stop yourself from learning. I think number one is like the most important thing is like, as nurses, we have such a rigorous training, not only when it comes to your formal education, like getting your associates or bachelor's, but there's also rigorous training once you actually move into a care unit. Like there's going to be specific nuances and skill sets that we didn't learn in nursing school, or we might have had a very, very minimal exposure to it in clinicals. But never stop learning. There's this whole macroeconomic environment in healthcare that exists. So there's specific parts, whether that's payer, policy, product, that you just want exposure to. So that even reading articles in your business journals, or even things that happen in the ANA nursing newsletter or journals, all of those things, all of those professional organizations that live in the nursing realm, like ANCC or AACN, all of them have articles that are cross-disciplinary, multidisciplinary, in the sense that you're going to have a taste and exposure of exactly what kinds of things are happening in the industry that's affecting nurses. So whether that's things like reimbursement rates, or whether that's new FDA regulations for specific medical devices that you as the nurse would need to apply to, or certain pharmaceuticals in which your hospital or your health system's pharmacy would need to start administering to patients because this has been approved. All of that has downstream effects to nurses. So understanding exactly who those key players are, I think, is the great initial exposure to learning. I think another thing too is really, like to Audrey's point earlier, is just don't lose sight of your value. Your value for being able to be talking to patients and their families, that can easily translate to exceptional client-facing experience, right? I don't want to think of the patient as a client, because that's just such a, what am I trying to say? It's, that's a different part of healthcare. In the nursing space, we care differently, right? Like the way that we care and provide that compassion is different to how I do it for my clients or my customers. But if you kind of take things as kind of comparable models, think of that, think of it in that sense. And I think too, another thing that's very important is the way that interventions or order sets are shown on your EMR. Think of those as key tasks or key deliverables for a project plan that you have to complete. So there are elements right now in your profession that are easily transferable, whether they're hard skills or soft skills, right? The fact that you are client-facing or patient-facing, for that matter, the way that you're able to prioritize and understand which of these interventions are most mission critical and which of these can I bring into later on. That critical thinking is so important across the board, regardless of whether or not you're looking for something in tech or operations.
Yeah. Absolutely. I subscribe to a lot of different newsletters from different sources that kind of, they keep me in the loop on a lot of things. So I think you're spot on with just consuming information. And in our digital world today, it is easier now, probably more so than ever, to just consume information, whether that's listening to a podcast or reading a blog or getting a newsletter or whatever it is, just starting to get that bigger picture that's surrounding the environment that you're working in every day is big. And yeah, I'm with you on recognizing, or at least trying to, because I know that it's hard to kind of flip that switch in your brain from what you're doing at the bedside and how that might translate somewhere else. But to your point, like, yeah, it's those things, it's those interpersonal skills that we're practicing every single day, the problem solving, all of that that translates. So it's good to just kind of keep in the back of your mind. You need to like have a light bulb go off when you're doing something and it's like, this could be good in another setting as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Michael, it's been such a pleasure having you on today. I'm really glad that we got to share your journey, what you're doing with Lumago. I'm really excited for the hard launch of that in 2025, right? So I'll have to stay tuned.
For sure, Audrey, thank you so much for your time. This has been a true pleasure. And, thank you for all the listeners that was able to listen to this podcast.
If you'd like to connect with Michael after today's show, you can connect with him on LinkedIn. Or if you're interested in pivoting your career from nursing to tech, you can reach out to him at michael@lumagoservices.com to schedule an initial consultation. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to hit subscribe to keep up with our latest episodes. And if you were inspired by today's conversation, I hope you'll share this episode with someone who'd love it just as much as you did. If you're ready to pivot your path, visit the job board at jobs.mypivotpath.com. And if you have any questions or just want to say hi, feel free to email me at audrey@mypivotpath.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.